The Price of a Ghost, Chapter 1. The Call in the Quiet. The grease was the first thing you noticed. It was a smell, a taste, a thin, shimmering film on every surface of the Starlight Diner. It clung to the cracked red vinyl of the booths, to the sticky menus, to the weary fabric of Audrey Miller's uniform. At 62, Audrey had spent the last 15 years of her life breathing it in, a permanent seasoning for a life that had long lost its flavor. Her world was a small one, circumscribed by the 4 blocks between her cramped Philadelphia apartment and the diner's humming, fluorescent lights. It was a life of routine. The 4 a.m. alarm, the walk through silent, sweeping streets, the endless cycle of coffee pots, sticky counters, and the tired faces of strangers. She was a ghost in her own life, a pale, quiet woman who took orders and gave change, her presence barely registering. She was a widow. Her husband, Joe, a good man with bad lungs, had died a decade ago, leaving her with a mountain of medical bills and a silence in their small apartment that was louder than any city noise. They'd had no children. Audrey had always carried a quiet sorrow about that, a hollow space inside her that echoed her deepest secret. She was adopted. She'd arrived in the world as a blank slate, a nameless infant left at a church, and had spent her life feeling like a guest in someone else's story. This particular Tuesday was like any other. The lunchtime rush had subsided, leaving behind a battlefield of dirty plates and crumpled napkins. Audrey was wiping down the counter, her movements slow and automatic, when the diner's phone rang. It was a shrill, ugly sound that cut through the low hum of the coolers. Her boss, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, grunted from the kitchen. "Audrey, get that, will ya?" She picked up the receiver, tucking it between her shoulder and her ear. "Starlight Diner. I'm looking for a Viz Audrey Miller," a man's voice said. It was a strange voice for the Starlight. It was crisp, educated, and utterly devoid of the city's rough accent. It sounded expensive. "This is she," Audrey said, her brow furrowing. "Ms. Miller, my name is Arthur Finch. I am an attorney representing the estate of a recently deceased client." Audrey paused, the wet rag still in her hand. An attorney? This had to be a mistake. Or worse, a debt collector using a new trick. "If this is about my late husband's medical bills, I'm paying what I can. $100 a month. You know that." There was a dry, rustling sound, like old paper. "No, Ms. Miller, this is not about a debt. Quite the opposite. I am calling to inform you that you have been named the sole beneficiary of the estate of Eleonora Van Doren." The name meant nothing to her. "Van Doren? I don't know anyone by that name." "You have the wrong person." "I assure you, I do not," the voice said, patient and precise. "Eleonora Van Doren was your biological mother." The rag fell from Audrey's hand and slapped onto the floor. The world seemed to tilt and go silent. The clatter from the kitchen, the buzz of the lights, the traffic outside, it all faded away. Biological mother. 2 words she had spent a lifetime wondering about, whispering to herself in the dark, and now they were being delivered over a greasy diner telephone by a stranger. My mother," she whispered, her throat suddenly tight. "Indeed," Mr. Finch said, "and she has left you her entire estate, a considerable fortune." "A fortune? For me?" The thought was so absurd, so utterly alien, that Audrey almost laughed. It had to be a joke, a cruel, heartless joke. She, Audrey Miller, who counted every penny, who reused tea bags and patched her own sweaters, was the heir to a fortune? "This is a scam," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual cynicism. "People don't just get calls like this. What do you want? My bank account number? My social security?" "I understand your skepticism, Mr. Finch said, his tone unchanging. "Which is why I am not asking for any of that. The inheritance is real, Ms. Miller. However, there is a condition, a price, if you will, that must be paid before you can claim it." There it was, the catch. There was always a catch. "A price? How much? I don't have any money." "The price is not monetary," Finch said, and the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "It is a process, a series of requirements outlined in Ms. Miller Van Doren's last will and testament. To learn the nature of this process, you must travel to my office, here in Bar Harbor, Maine." Maine? It might as well have been the moon. Audrey had never been farther north than the Jersey Shore. "I can't just pick up and go to Maine. I have a job, a life." "A life?" The word mocked her. "What life? A life of grease and exhaustion? Of being invisible?" "The estate is prepared to reimburse your travel expenses upon your arrival," Finch continued smoothly. "But the initial effort must be yours. It is the first test. Think of it as a down payment on your new life." He gave her the address of his office and his phone number. "I will await your call, Ms. Miller. You have 1 week to decide. After that, the offer and the estate will be forfeited." The line went dead. Audrey stood frozen, the receiver pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. It was a scam. It had to be. A wild, elaborate fantasy. But what if it wasn't? What if in a grand stone mansion on the coast of Maine, a woman she had never known had died and left behind an answer to the question that had defined Audrey's entire existence? Who am I? The money was a fantasy, a ridiculous dream. But the mother was real. For the first time in 62 years, she had a name. Eleonora Van Doren. The smell of grease suddenly felt suffocating. Audrey looked around the dingy diner, at the cracked vinyl and the faded posters. This wasn't a life. It was a waiting room. And maybe, just maybe, her name had finally been called. She had no money, no resources, nothing but a flicker of impossible hope. But as she hung up the phone, a decision began to form in her weary heart. A decision so reckless, so out of character, that it terrified and thrilled her all at once. She was going to Maine. She had to know. Even if it was a lie, she had to know. She had to pay the price just to see the ghost. Chapter 2. A Ticket to a Ghost. The week that followed was a blur of quiet panic and feverish planning. The phrase, "a considerable fortune," echoed in Audrey's mind, a siren song that was almost drowned out by the louder, more practical voice of doubt. Scams like this preyed on people like her, lonely, desperate, with just enough hope to be foolish. She told no one about the call. Not Sal, her boss, who would have laughed in her face. Not the regulars at the diner, who saw her only as a pair of hands delivering coffee. She told only one person because she had to. Her neighbor, a kind, retired schoolteacher named Maria. Maria lived in the apartment across the hall. She was Audrey's only real friend, a woman with a sharp mind and a generous heart. That evening, Audrey knocked on her door, clutching a lukewarm cup of tea. "Maria," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to ask you for something, and you have to promise you won't think I've lost my mind." She told her the whole story. The call from the lawyer, the biological mother she never knew, the fortune, the mysterious price, and the trip to Maine. Maria listened patiently, her intelligent eyes searching Audrey's face. When Audrey finished, the older woman was silent for a long moment. It sounds like a fairy tale, Audrey, she said finally. I know, it sounds crazy. It's probably a scam to get me up there, and I don't know, sell me a timeshare or steal my identity, what little I have of it. Probably, Maria agreed. She took a sip of her own tea. But your mother's name. He gave you a name. That was it. That was the hook. Maria understood. It wasn't about the money. It was about the name. Eleonora Van Doren. A bus ticket to Bar Harbor is about $200 round trip. Audrey said, the words tasting like ash. It might as well be $2 million. I don't have it. Maria looked at her friend, at the deep lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, at the faded hope that flickered there like a dying candle. Yes, you do, Maria said quietly. She stood up, went to a small writing desk, and took out an old cash box. She counted out $250 in worn bills. This is a loan, for the ticket and for a meal or two when you get there. Audrey stared at the money, tears welling in her eyes. Maria, I can't. What if it's nothing? I'll never be able to pay you back. Then you won't, Maria said simply, pressing the money into Audrey's hand. But what if it's something? Audrey, you've spent your whole life wondering. Don't you think you deserve an answer? Go. Find out. For your own peace of mind. 2 days later, Audrey was standing at the bus station, a small worn suitcase at her feet. She had told Sal she had a family emergency, a lie that felt flimsy even as she said it. The bus was old, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and diesel fumes. It was a world away from the crisp, expensive voice of Arthur Finch. The journey was long and uncomfortable. 16 hours of rumbling highways, anonymous rest stops, and the blurred landscapes of states she'd only ever seen on a map. As the bus traveled north, out of Pennsylvania, through New York and into New England, Audrey felt a strange sense of dislocation. She was leaving the only life she had ever known, heading toward a complete unknown. With every mile, the gritty reality of Philadelphia faded, replaced by the deep greens of forests and the brilliant blues of a northern sky. She was terrified. What would she find? A slick con artist waiting to fleece her of her last borrowed dollars? Or something even more terrifying, the truth? What if her mother had been a terrible person? What if Audrey had been abandoned for a reason? She arrived in Bar Harbor in the late afternoon. The town was a shock. It was beautiful, impossibly so. A charming village of quaint shops and seafood restaurants, nestled against a backdrop of granite mountains and the sparkling blue-black waters of the Atlantic. The air was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles and salt. Wealth was everywhere, not in a loud, flashy way, but in the quiet confidence of the old, stately homes, the gleaming sailboats in the harbor, and the relaxed, well-dressed people strolling along the streets. Audrey, in her worn coat and scuffed shoes, felt more invisible than ever. She was a ghost from another world. Arthur Finch's office was on the main street, in a historic brick building overlooking the water. The sign on the door was discreet, just a small brass plaque. Finch and Associates, attorneys at law. Taking a deep breath, she opened the heavy oak door. The office was as quiet as a church. It smelled of lemon polish, old books, and money. A severe-looking receptionist looked up from her desk. May I help you? I'm Audrey Miller. I have an appointment with Mr. Finch. The words felt foreign in her mouth. She had never had an appointment with an attorney in her life. The receptionist's expression didn't change, but she nodded. He's expecting you. Right this way. She led Audrey down a hushed, carpeted hallway to a large office at the end. The room was dominated by a massive mahogany desk and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the harbor. A man stood by the window, his back to her. He was tall and thin, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit. He turned around. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with thinning silver hair and intelligent, piercing blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. It was the voice from the phone, embodied. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice as crisp as the main air. "Welcome. I am Arthur Finch. Please, have a seat." He didn't smile. His expression was one of professional neutrality. He sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers. Audrey sat opposite him, her small suitcase on the floor beside her, feeling like a child called into the principal's office. "You came," Finch stated. It wasn't a question. "I came," Audrey confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. "Good," he said. That was the first step. It showed intent. He slid a thick, sealed envelope across the polished surface of the desk. "As I mentioned, your inheritance is conditional. Your mother was a woman of specific tastes and specific demands. The full terms are outlined in her will, but I will summarize." He paused, his blue eyes fixing on her. Eleonora Van Doren's estate, which includes her residence, its contents, and a significant portfolio of investments, will pass to you under one condition. You must agree to reside in her home alone for a period of 1 month, 31 days. During that time, you are to complete 5 tasks. The tasks are detailed in 5 sealed letters, which you are to open one by one in order. You may not proceed to the next task until the previous one is complete. I will be the sole judge of completion." Audrey stared at him, dumbfounded. Live in a dead one's house? Complete a series of tasks? This was beyond strange. It felt like something out of a Gothic novel. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "If you refuse, or if you fail to complete the tasks in the allotted time, the entire estate is forfeit. It will be dissolved and donated to a variety of charities she despised." It was her final joke. "Why?" Audrey asked, the question bursting out of her. Why would she do this? Why not just leave me the money? For the first time, a flicker of something that wasn't neutrality crossed Arthur Finch's face. It might have been sympathy. "Because, Miss Miller," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "the money was never the point. Your mother did not want to give you her fortune. She wanted to give you her story. The tasks are the chapters. The house is the book. The price of this inheritance is that you must be willing to read it." He stood up. "I will have my driver take you to the house. The first letter is waiting for you on the mantelpiece. The pantry is stocked. The utilities are on. You will have no contact with the outside world for the next month, save for 1 weekly supervised phone call to your friend Maria. I believe you borrowed some money from her. Consider it repaid." He handed her an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a key, an old iron key. Audrey felt a wave of dizziness. This was happening. It was real. She was being handed the key to a dead woman's house, her mother's house. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice small. "Who was she? My mother. What was she like?" He walked to the window, looking out at the sailboats bobbing in the harbor. "She was an artist," he said quietly. "She was a genius. She was the most brilliant and the most broken person I have ever known. And she waited her whole life for you to come home." Chapter 3. The House on the Cliff. The drive to the house was a silent journey through a landscape of impossible beauty. A sleek black car, driven by a man who didn't speak a word, wound its way up the side of a mountain, through dense forests of pine and birch. Glimpses of the ocean appeared and disappeared through the trees, a brilliant sapphire blue. They passed through a pair of imposing stone gates, rusted with age and half swallowed by ivy. A long, winding driveway snaked through overgrown grounds, ending in a circular gravel path before a house that took Audrey's breath away. It wasn't just a house, it was a mansion. A grand Gothic revival monstrosity of dark granite and steep, gabled roofs, perched dramatically on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, like a creature from a forgotten fairy tale. It looked haunted. It looked lonely. The driver stopped the car, got out, and placed Audrey's worn suitcase on the gravel. He handed her a small, modern cell phone. "This is for your weekly call, and for emergencies only. Mr. Finch's number is pre-programmed. The iron key opens the front door. Good luck, madam." And with that, he got back in the car and drove away. His tires crunching on the gravel, the sound fading until there was only the cry of gulls and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs below. Audrey was alone. She stood for a long time, just looking at the house, her mother's house. The thought was staggering. She, Audrey Miller, who had lived her life in cramped apartments and noisy city streets, was standing in front of this. It felt like a mistake, like she had wandered onto a movie set. The iron key felt heavy and cold in her hand. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the stone steps to the massive, arched front door. The key scraped in the lock, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into a darkness that smelled of dust, salt, and something else, something faintly floral, like dried roses. She stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind her, the latch clicking with a dreadful finality. She was in a vast, two-story foyer. A grand staircase swept upward into the shadows. Furniture stood like shrouded ghosts under white dust cloths. The only light came from a tall, Palladian window at the top of the stairs, its glass grimy, casting a weak, gray light on the dust motes dancing in the air. This was Eleonora Van Doren's world, a world of shadows and silence. In the cavernous living room to her right, a massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. And on its thick wooden mantelpiece, just as Finch had said, was a single sealed envelope of heavy, cream-colored paper. Her name was written on it in elegant, looping cursive. Audrey. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. This was it, the beginning of the story, the first chapter. She broke the wax seal, a stylized letter V, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The same cursive, written in dark ink, filled the page. "My dearest Audrey, if you are reading this, it means you came. It means you were brave enough, or perhaps just curious enough, to step into my world. Thank you. That is the first gift you have given me. I was an artist. It was the only way I knew how to breathe. But my breath, my life's work, is now in chaos. It is a reflection of my soul, I suppose. Scattered, unfinished. Your first task is to bring it order. There is a studio at the back of the house, overlooking the sea. It has been locked for years. The key is in the top left drawer of the desk in the library. Your task is this: restore my studio to the way it should have been. Clean it, organize it, uncover what is hidden. Let the light in. You will know when it is done. The room will tell you. I know this is strange. I know I am asking a lot of a stranger. But you are not a stranger to me. You have lived in my heart every day for 62 years. Yours in hope, Eleonora." Audrey read the letter 3 times, her mind struggling to comprehend it. Restore my studio. What did that even mean? She wasn't a cleaner, an organizer. She was a diner waitress. She found the library. It was a magnificent room, lined with thousands of books, their spines faded and dusty. The air was thick with the scent of agew paper. She found the desk, a heavy, ornate piece of furniture, and in the top left drawer, as promised, was another key, a smaller, more delicate brass key. At the end of a long, dark hallway on the ground floor, she found a single heavy oak door. The studio. She put the key in the lock. It turned, and she pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. A sharp, chemical tang of turpentine and linseed oil, layered over the ever-present dust. The room was huge, with a soaring ceiling and a massive floor-to-ceiling window that should have flooded the space with light. But it was covered by a thick, filthy velvet curtain, plunging the room into a deep twilight. Canvases were everywhere, hundreds of them. They were stacked against the walls, leaning on easels, lying on the floor. Some were vast, others tiny. Most were unfinished, streaked with angry, chaotic slashes of color. Canvases covered in drop cloths, paint-splattered furniture, overturned jars of dried brushes, palettes caked with inches of hardened paint. It was a creative hurricane, frozen in time. Overwhelmed, Audrey stood in the doorway, not knowing where to begin. This wasn't a task. It was an archaeological dig. But the letter had said, "You will know when it is done." She walked to the enormous window and grabbed the velvet curtain. It was heavy, stiff with grime. She pulled. With a screech of protesting rings and a cloud of dust that made her choke, the curtain slid back, and the light poured in. It was a brilliant, blinding flood of late afternoon sun, illuminating the entire chaotic room. And in that light, Audrey saw the paintings for the first time. They were dark, turbulent, abstract seascapes of churning, violent water. Anguished, twisted figures that seemed to be screening from the canvas. And then she saw the recurring image. In dozens of paintings, hidden in the chaos, was the same motif. A tiny swaddled shape, an infant. Sometimes it was held by a weeping, faceless woman. Sometimes it was floating alone on a dark sea. Sometimes it was just an outline, a ghost in the background. It was her. She was looking at 60 years of her mother's pain, splashed across canvases in raw, unfiltered color. This wasn't just a room. It was a tomb, a monument to a loss so profound it had consumed a life. And her task was to clean it, to bring order to this breathtaking chaos, to let the light in. She found a closet with brooms, buckets, and rags. She tied her hair back with a piece of twine she found on the floor. And with the setting sun casting long, golden fingers of light across the room, Audrey Miller, the invisible cashier from Philadelphia, began the impossible task of cleaning her mother's soul. She had a month, She had a house, and she had a story to uncover. One brushstroke at a time. Chapter 4: The Archaeology of a Soul. The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. Audrey would wake with the sun, the light streaming through the grimy windows of the master bedroom, Eleanora's bedroom, which she had claimed as her own. She would make coffee in the vast, echoing kitchen, the silence of the house a constant companion. And then she would go to the studio. The first few days were pure physical labor. She swept away thick blankets of dust that had settled like volcanic ash. She filled bucket after bucket with black, gritty water, scrubbing the wide plank wooden floors. She carefully wiped down every jar, every tube of paint, every hardened brush. She discovered that Eleanora had used only the finest materials, imported from France and Italy. Even in her chaos, there was a deep respect for the craft. As she worked, she began to create categories. Unpainted space after the sunset got unloaded, a blanket twisted around her and dented all her pain. And then she would go to the studio. The first few days were pure physical labor. She filled bucket after bucket with black, gritty water, scrubbing the wide plank wooden floors. She carefully wiped down every jar, every tube of paint, every hardened brush. She sorted the brushes by size and type, lining them up like soldiers in clean jars. She organized the tubes of paint by color, creating a rainbow of potential on dusty shelves. The physical act of bringing order to the space was strangely calming. It was a task with a clear beginning and a clear end, so different from the endless, circular nature of her life at the diner. But the real work, the hard work, was with the canvases. There were hundreds. She had to move each one. She brought in music. And when everyone had arrived, and dust it and decide where it should go. It was like curating a museum of a single shattered heart. She created sections. The early works were more figurative, showing a remarkable classical talent. It was like curating a museum of a single shattered heart. She created sections. The early works were more figurative, showing a remarkable classical talent. This we should remember. We must remember that everyone has a role to play, but mainly that order is only possible if it is silent. But this doesn't mean that her mother's pain continued to resonate with faceless women or men. Moen was not dark and dented from the family photos. She was looking at painted end works with faceless women or men. As she was away from her mother, Moen had to face numerous upheavals. She was a deep wonder for the. There were portraits of a handsome, smiling young man with the sea in his eyes. The fisherman, she presumed. There were landscapes of a sun-drenched, happy Maine coast. Then came the shift. The paintings became darker, more abstract around the time Audrey would have been born. The colors turned to bruised purples, angry reds, and deep, sorrowful blues. The forms twisted, and the swaddled infant began to appear, a wound that would never heal. Audrey found herself talking to Eleonora as she worked. "What were you thinking here, Mom?" she'd whisper to a particularly violent canvas. This one must have hurt." She stopped calling her Eleonora. In the privacy of the studio, in the intimacy of this shared task, she was Mom. One afternoon, while moving a large canvas that had been leaning against a wall for decades, she found something behind it. A small, child-sized wooden chair, and sitting on it, covered in dust, was a worn, leather-bound sketchbook. Her heart pounding, she took the book to the window seat, the one place she had cleared for herself, and opened it. It was filled with sketches, dozens and dozens of them, all of a baby, her baby. There were sketches of a tiny hand, a sleeping face, a small curled-up body. They were drawn with such love, such incredible tenderness. It was almost painful to look at them. Eleonora had been memorizing her. In the short time she had her, she had been desperately trying to burn every detail of her child into her memory, to capture her on paper so she could never be truly lost. On the last page, there was a single finished portrait, a beautiful charcoal drawing of a sleeping newborn, her face peaceful. Beneath it, in the familiar, elegant script, was one word: Audrey. Audrey traced the name with her finger, tears streaming down her face. This was not the work of a woman who had abandoned her child. She had been desperately trying to burn every detail of her child into her memory, to capture her on. This was the work of a woman whose child had been stolen from her. For the first time, Audrey didn't just feel pity for her mother. She felt a fierce, protective love. The task took her 2 full weeks. She cleaned every corner. She organized every tool. She created a chronological walkthrough of the art, leaning the finished pieces against the walls, creating a gallery of a life. The unfinished canvases, the ones that were just raw slashes of pain. She stacked neatly in a corner, covering them with a clean dropcloth, a respectful burial. On the 15th day, she was done. She had scrubbed the massive window until it sparkled. She had polished the floors. The studio was no longer a tomb. It was a workspace again. It was quiet, organized, and filled with a clean, clear light. The rage had been ordered. The grief had been catalogued. She stood in the center of the room. Looking at the progression of her mother's life displayed on the walls. She finally understood. Eleonora hadn't just been painting her pain. She had been painting her love. The only way she knew how. "You will know when it is done," the letter had said. "The room will tell you." And it did. The room felt peaceful. It felt ready. It felt like it was waiting for an artist to come in and pick up a brush. Audrey walked back into the main house, to the living room fireplace, and there, in burning baby is a better person. She stacked neatly in a corner, covering them with a clean dropcloth. On the mantelpiece, where the first letter had been, now sat a second. Another cream-colored envelope, sealed with the saying wax V. Her hands were clean, but her soul felt streaked with the memory of her mother's paint. She had completed the first task. She had paid the first part of the price. And she was ready for the next chapter. Chapter 5. The Ghost in the Garden. Audrey broke the seal on the second letter, her fingers less hesitant this time. The cursive was the same. Everything we do is with a tuned beast, like a woman who had been stolen from her. The letter was not as sparing as the book. Audrey felt a love, a voice from the grave that was becoming strangely familiar. My Audrey, well done. I can almost feel the light in my studio from here. I hope in ordering my art, you began to see the shape of me, the shape of my love for you. My second great passion after painting was my garden. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could create life, where I could nurture beauty in a world that had shown me so much ugliness. But like my studio, like my soul, it has been neglected. It has run wild. It is a tangle of weeds and thorns. Your second task is to bring it back to life, but it's more than just weeding. I spent years cultivating a unique rose, a hybrid I created myself. It has no name, but you will know it by its color. The deep, velvety purple of a twilight sky. It is the only one of its kind in the world. I called it the Lost Rose because I planted it the year I lost you. It is still out there, somewhere in the tangle. Your task is this: find the lost rose. You must clear the garden, find the bush, and bring it back to health. It is a piece of my heart planted in the earth. Be patient. Look closely. Beauty often survives in the most unlikely of places. Yours, in hope, Eleonora. Audrey lowered the letter, a sense of weary dread settling over her. A garden. She had never had a garden in her life. The closest she'd come was a sad, drooping geranium on her apartment fire escape. The grounds of the estate were vast, acres of what now looked like impenetrable wilderness. Finding a single rose bush seemed like a task for a team of professional botanists, not a 62-year-old diner waitress with an aching back. She found a crumbling garden shed behind the house, filled with rusted, ancient-looking tools. She chose a pair of thick leather gloves, a sturdy-looking trowel, and a pair of long-handled shears. Dressed in old clothes she'd found in a closet, she stepped out into the wild expanse of the garden. It was worse than she had imagined. What had once been elegant, terraced beds were now choked with weeds as tall as she was. Thorns and thorny vines snaked across overgrown paths. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. It was a jungle. She started small, choosing a single patch near the house. The work was brutal. Her muscles, accustomed to the small movements of wiping counters and making change, screamed in protest. She pulled up stubborn, deep-rooted weeds, hacked away at thorny brambles that tore at her clothes and skin, and dug into the hard, compacted soil. At the end of the first day, she had cleared a patch no bigger than a bathtub. She was covered in dirt, scratched and bleeding, and exhausted to the bone. She collapsed into bed that night, wondering if this task was truly possible. But something strange happened. The next morning, as she looked out at the tiny patch of cleared earth, she felt a flicker of pride. It was a small victory, but it was hers. She had imposed a tiny piece of order on the chaos. So she kept going. Day after day, she worked from sunup to sundown. She learned the rhythm of the work, the satisfying tug of a weed coming up by the roots, the clean snip of the shears. She began to learn the difference between the invaders and the dormant treasures hiding beneath. She uncovered the ghostly outlines of old stone paths, the remnants of a forgotten herb garden, the gnarled ancient limbs of what might have been an apple orchard. She was not just clearing a garden. She was excavating a memory. She was uncovering the sanctuary her mother had built for herself. About a week into the task, as she was wrestling with a particularly stubborn thicket of thorns near a crumbling stone wall, she heard a voice. "That's a devil's vine. You'll never get it with shears. You need a mattock for the roots." Audrey jumped, startled, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around. An old man was standing on the path behind her. He was weathered and wiry, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his hands gnarled like the roots of an old tree. He held a rusty mattock in one hand. "Who are you?" Audrey asked, her voice sharp with alarm. Finch had said she was to be alone. "Name Silas," the man said, his voice a gravelly Maine whisper. "I was the groundskeeper here for 40 years, before she let everything go." He nodded toward the house. "Mr. Finch said I was to have no visitors," Audrey said, still wary. "Finch don't own the sky," Silas grumbled. "I live just through the woods. I saw you out here, fighting a losing battle. Figured you could use a hand." He looked at the small patch she had cleared. "You've done good work, though, for a city woman." Something in his eyes, a deep-set sadness, made her trust him. My mother, she set me a task. I have to find a rose, a purple one." Silas's expression softened. "Ah, the lost rose." He knew. She loved that thing. Talked to it like it was a person. "Haven't seen it bloom in 20 years. But the roots of a good rose are tough. It's probably still in here, sleeping." He didn't offer to help with the physical labor, respecting the terms of the will. But he started visiting every afternoon. He'd sit on the stone wall, sipping from a thermos. And he would talk. He would tell her about Eleonora. "She was a firecracker when she was young," he said one day. "Laughed like a ringing bell. Loved that fisherman boy, Michael, with everything she had. He was a good lad. Her family, the Van Dorens, they were poison. Old money and cold hearts." He told her about the day Eleonora had come back from the city, after Audrey had been born and adopted. "She was a ghost," Silas said, his voice low. "The fire was gone, just ashes. She locked herself in that house and never really came out again. Started this garden. Poured all the love she couldn't give to you into the dirt." His stories brought Eleonora to life in a way the paintings couldn't. He gave her a voice, a laugh. He filled in the silent spaces. Through Silas, Audrey began to know the vibrant young woman her mother had been, before grief had carved her into a recluse. The search for the rose became a shared quest. Silas would point out areas where the soil was richer, where a resilient plant might have survived. One rainy afternoon, huddled under the shelter of a large pine tree, Silas told her about Eleonora's brother. "Her older brother William," Silas said, his voice laced with contempt. "He's the one who ran the show, head of the family. He's the one who forced her to give you up. Said he'd ruin Michael and his whole family if she didn't. He lives just on the other side of the island, in a house even bigger than this one. He's an old man now, but just as mean. He always hated that she got the family home. He thinks this place and all the money should be his. The knowledge that this man, this architect of her mother's misery, was alive and nearby sent a chill down Audrey's spine. It made the story feel dangerously present. Weeks passed. Audrey's body grew stronger, her hands calloused and capable. She had cleared almost the entire garden. It was still wild. But it was a managed wildness now. You could see the structure, the ghost of its former glory. But there was no sign of the purple rose. She was beginning to lose hope. Maybe it had died. Maybe the task was impossible. One evening, exhausted and discouraged, she was clearing the last, most overgrown section, a tangle of ivy against the foundation of the studio itself. As she pulled away a thick curtain of green, she saw it, a single, stubborn rosebush, gnarled and almost leafless, but not dead. And on one of its thorny branches was a single, tightly closed bud, a bud of the deepest, darkest purple she had ever seen. She had found it. With tears of sheer relief and exhaustion streaming down her face, Audrey knelt in the dirt. She carefully cleared the remaining weeds from around its base. She loosened the soil with her trowel. She brought it water. She spoke to it, just as her mother must have done. "There you are," she whispered. "I found you. You survived." It was more than just a rose. It was a symbol of resilience, of stubborn beauty, of a love that had refused to die, hidden away in the darkest corner, waiting for 62 years for a daughter to come and find it. That evening, a third envelope was waiting on the mantelpiece. Audrey looked at her reflection in the dark glass of a window. Her face was tanned from the sun, her hair was unruly, and her hands were the hands of a gardener. She didn't look like the pale, weary cashier from the Starlight Diner anymore. She looked alive. The price, she was beginning to realize, was a strange and painful form of alchemy. It was turning her into someone new. Chapter 6. The Sound of a Memory. Audrey opened the third letter. Her body ached, but her spirit felt a strange sense of accomplishment. She had conquered the wildness of the garden. She had found the lost rose. "My daughter, I knew you would find it. Patience and love can uncover anything. I hope that in tending to my garden, you felt the peace it once brought me. I hope you felt my presence in the soil. Now for a different kind of challenge, one that requires not strength of body, but a quietness of spirit. In the main parlor, there is a grand piano. It has been silent for a very long time. My father insisted I learn to play as a girl, a skill for a proper young lady. I hated his lessons, the stiff formal music he made me practice. But later, in my loneliest hours, it became a comfort. After you were born, in the few weeks I had with you, I wrote a song, a simple melody, a lullaby I never had the chance to sing to you. The sheet music is on the piano. Your third task is this: learn to play the lullaby. The music itself is not difficult. The challenge is to let it into your heart. Mr. Finch has been instructed to arrange for a music teacher to visit you once a week. Listen to her. Listen to the notes. They are the only words of love I was ever able to give you directly. Yours, in hope, Eleonora. A piano? A lullaby? Audrey's heart sank. She had never touched a piano in her life. Her hands, now calloused and strong from gardening, felt clumsy and ill-suited for the delicacy of ivory keys. This felt like the cruelest task yet, a reminder of a cultured world she had never been a part of. She went into the parlor, a cavernous room she had barely entered. Under a thick dustcloth was the shape of a grand piano. She pulled the cover off. It was a magnificent instrument. Its black lacquer finish, cloudy with dust. She lifted the keyboard cover. The keys were yellowed with age, like old teeth. On the music stand, just as the letter had said, was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was her mother's. At the top, it read, Audrey's Lullaby. The melody was simple, just a few lines of music. It looked like a child's song, but to Audrey it was an alien language. The next day, as promised, a car came up the long driveway. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, got out. "You must be Audrey," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Mrs. Gable, your music teacher." Her lessons with Mrs. Gable were agonizing at first. Audrey's fingers felt like clumsy sausages on the keys. She struggled to remember the notes, to coordinate her hands. The sounds she produced were jarring, clumsy, a painful parody of the gentle melody on the page. "Don't think so much about the notes, dear," Mrs. Gable would say patiently. "Think about the feeling. A lullaby is a promise. It's a promise of safety, of love." But all Audrey felt was frustration. She felt foolish, an old woman trying to learn a child's trick. She was a fraud, an imposter in this grand house, and the piano seemed to know it, resisting her at every turn. One evening, after a particularly frustrating lesson, she almost gave up. She slammed the keyboard cover shut, the sound echoing through the silent house. What was the point of this? It was a pointless, sentimental game. She went into the studio, her sanctuary. She looked at the paintings, at the raw emotion her mother had poured onto the canvases. She saw the weeping women, the lost infants, the churning seas, and then she looked at her own hands. These were the hands that had cleaned this room. These were the hands that had tamed the garden, that had found the lost rose. They were capable hands. She thought about her mother, a young woman full of grief, sitting at that same piano. She wasn't writing a song for a concert hall. She was writing it for her baby, a simple, secret promise she could only whisper to the keys. Audrey went back to the parlor. She sat down at the piano, but this time she didn't look at the sheet music. She closed her eyes. She imagined her mother sitting beside her. She imagined a tiny, sleeping baby in a cradle nearby. She thought about the promise, safety, love. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play, slowly, hesitantly. But this time, something was different. She wasn't just pressing keys. She was tracing a memory. The melody emerged, simple, haunting, and heartbreakingly beautiful. It was a sad song, but it was a hopeful one too. It spoke of loss, but it also spoke of a love that endured, a thread of music connecting a mother and daughter across 60 years of silence. She played it again and again, the notes flowing more easily each time, until the melody became a part of her. It was as if her fingers had known the song all along. When Mrs. Gable came for her next lesson, Audrey played it for her. When she finished, the room was silent. Mrs. Gable's eyes were filled with tears. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, "that was beautiful. You didn't just play the notes, you played the story." That night, Audrey played the lullaby one last time, the melody filling the vast, empty house. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt full, full of the presence of the woman who had lived and grieved and loved within its walls. The task was complete. Audrey had found her mother's voice, and in doing so, she was beginning to find her own. On the mantelpiece, the fourth envelope waited. This one felt different, heavier, more ominous. She knew instinctively that this would be the hardest chapter yet. This would be the one that explained everything. Chapter 7. The Unsent Letters. The fourth envelope was thicker than the others. The wax seal seemed harder to break. Audrey's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, there wasn't a single sheet of paper, but a thick stack of them, tied with a faded silk ribbon. On top was a note in Eleonora's familiar script. My Audrey, you have brought order to my art, beauty to my garden, and life to my music. You have walked through the rooms of my life, and I hope you are beginning to understand. Now it is time for the truth, all of it. I have done my best to tell you my story through my creations, but there are things that paint and music cannot say. These are the letters I wrote to you over the years. One for every birthday. I never sent them. I was afraid. I didn't know where you were, and I was ashamed. Your fourth task is the simplest and the hardest. Read the truth. Read my words, and please, try to understand. Yours in hope, Eleonora. Beneath the note was a stack of 61 letters, each in its own envelope, marked with a year. From 1963 to 2024. A lifetime of unspoken words. Audrey took the letters to the studio, her sanctuary, and sat in the window seat overlooking the sea. She untied the ribbon. With a deep breath, she opened the first letter, dated on her first birthday. To my darling Audrey, on your first birthday. Today, you are 1 year old. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you are warm, if you are loved, if you are smiling. The not knowing is a physical pain, a constant ache in my chest. They took you from me, my own family. They said it was for the best. They said you would have a better life, a normal life, away from the shame of my name. His name is Michael, your father. He is a fisherman with a heart as wide as the ocean and hands that are gentle and strong. My father, your grandfather, hated him because he was poor, because he was not one of us. When I told them I was pregnant, they gave me an ultimatum. Give you up, or they would destroy Michael. They would ruin his family, buy his fishing license, see to it he never worked on this coast again. He would have fought them, but I couldn't let him. I couldn't let my love for him be the thing that destroyed him. So I made a choice. I chose his life over ours, and I have regretted it every second of every day since. I held you for 6 weeks. I memorized your face, the smell of your skin, the feel of your tiny hand in mine. They were the only real weeks of my life. Happy first birthday, my sweet lost girl. Please, wherever you are, be loved. Audrey had to stop, a sob catching in her throat. The story she had imagined of a mother who didn't want her was a fiction. The truth was a tragedy, a story of class and cruelty, and an impossible choice. She read on, letter by letter, year by year. It was a chronicle of a life hollowed out by grief. On her 5th birthday, I saw a little girl with your color hair in town today. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run to her, to see her face, but she turned, and it wasn't you. It is never you. On her 16th birthday, you would be a young woman now. Do you like art? Music? Do you love the sea, like your father and I did? I started painting you today. Not your face. I can't remember it clearly enough anymore, and it breaks my heart. But the idea of you, a ghost in my paintings. On her 30th birthday, I heard that your father, Michael, passed away. A storm at sea. His boat went down. I hadn't seen him in 30 years, but my heart broke all over again. I hope he is at peace. I hope somehow he knows that our daughter is out there, living a life. She read about Eleonora's retreat from the world, Her arguments with her brother William, who controlled the family finances and lorded his power over her. She read about Eleanora's quiet friendship with Silas, the groundskeeper, the only person who knew her secret. The letters were filled with pain, but also with a fierce, unwavering love. Eleanora had followed Audrey's life in her imagination, creating a fantasy of what she might be doing, who she might be becoming. She had missed everything: her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her wedding to Joe, and the letters were her only way to be there, to bear witness to a life she was forbidden to be a part of. The last letter was dated just a few months ago. The handwriting was weak, spidery. My Audrey. The doctors tell me I don't have much time left. The cancer is greedy. It's funny. I am not afraid to die. My life ended, in a way, the day I gave you away. But I am afraid of leaving this world without trying, one last time, to reach you. I have hired a man, a lawyer named Finch. He is the best. He will find you after I am gone. He will bring you here. This house, this money, it is all meaningless. It is my apology. It is the only thing my poisonous family name can give you. A lifetime of regret, converted into stock portfolios and real estate. I hope it can give you some comfort, some freedom. But I know it cannot give you back the one thing we both lost: time. This journey I have sent you on, these tasks. It was my selfish, desperate attempt to have you know me, to have you walk through my life even after I am gone. It is the closest I will ever get to being your mother. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you beyond the grave. Goodbye, my daughter. Eleanora. By the time Audrey finished the last letter, the sun had set, and the studio was bathed in deep twilight. The stack of letters sat in her lap, a testament to 62 years of silent love and sorrow. She was weeping, but not for herself. She was weeping for the young girl who had been forced to make an impossible choice, for the brilliant artist who had spent her life painting her grief, for the mother she had never known and who had never for one single day stopped knowing her. The room was cold, but Audrey didn't feel it. She felt full. The hollow space inside her, the one she had carried her entire life, was gone. It had been filled, letter by letter, with the story of Eleanora Van Doren, her mother. She finally knew who she was. She was not a blank slate. She was the daughter of a great love. She was the child of the artist and the fisherman. She was the inheritor of a tragic, beautiful, and powerful story. This was the true inheritance. The money was just paper. This story, this was bone and blood and soul. On the mantelpiece, the fifth and final envelope was waiting. The last chapter. The end of the story and the beginning of her own. Chapter 8. The Heiress's Choice. The final envelope felt different in Audrey's hands. It was not a task, but a culmination. The price had been paid, not in money, but in dust and dirt, in clumsy musical notes and in tears shed over a lifetime of unsent letters. She had walked through her mother's life, and now she stood at the end of the path. She opened the letter. My dearest daughter, you have reached the end. You have read my story. You now know the truth of my life, which means you know the truth of your own. There is only one thing left to do. Your final task is not a task at all. It is a choice. My brother, William, the man who orchestrated my sorrow, still lives. He is an old man, trapped in his own bitterness, consumed by a greed he mistakes for strength. He believes this fortune is his. In a way, he's the final ghost in this story. Tomorrow morning, at sunrise, I want you to go to the cliff at the edge of the property. It was my favorite place. It is where your father first kissed me. When you stand there, looking out at the ocean, you have a choice to make. Choice 1. You can take everything: the house, the art, the entire portfolio of investments. It is all legally yours. You can sell it all, walk away with a fortune beyond imagining, and never look back. Forget the Van Dorens. Forget the pain they caused. Live a life of comfort. You have earned it. Choice 2. You can keep the house and enough of the fortune to live comfortably. The rest, the bulk of the estate, is to be used to establish the Eleonora Van Doren Foundation, a charity to support young, struggling artists who lack the family support I was denied. You will give my art, my name, a purpose beyond my own pain. And then you must go and see William, not for a fight, not for revenge, but to tell him that you, his forgotten niece, have chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins he created. You will be the one to end the cycle of bitterness. The choice, Audrey, is yours. Do you want to inherit my money, or do you want to inherit my legacy? One will make you rich. The other will make you free. Whatever you choose, know that you have my love and my blessing. Your mother, finally at peace, Eleonora. Audrey sat with the letter for a long time, the weight of the choice settling upon her. She thought of her life in Philadelphia, the grease of the diner, the unpaid bills, the feeling of invisibility. She could take the money and vanish, buy a warm apartment, travel, never worry about a price tag again. No one would blame her. But then she thought of the studio, filled with raw, beautiful pain. She thought of the lost rose, a stubborn survivor in the weeds. She thought of the simple, haunting notes of the lullaby. She thought of the letters, a 62-year testament of a mother's love. What was the point of all this, of this strange, emotional archaeology, if the end result was just a bank account? The price she had paid was not for money. It was for the story. And the story demanded a better ending than a quiet, wealthy retirement. The next morning, she woke before dawn. She dressed, not in the old, paint-stained clothes of her tasks, but in a simple, elegant black dress she had found in Eleonora's closet. It fit perfectly. She walked through the now familiar grounds, the sleeping garden, to the cliff's edge. The sky was turning from indigo to a soft, pearly gray. The sea was calm, whispering against the rocks below. It was a place of breathtaking peace. As the sun broke over the horizon, casting a brilliant, golden path across the water, Audrey made her choice. It wasn't even a choice, really. It was an inevitability. It was the only ending that made sense. Later that morning, she called Arthur Finch. "I've made my decision, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And that is? I want to establish the foundation, and I need you to arrange a meeting for me with William Van Doren." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Finch spoke again, his voice was different. She dressed, not in the old paint-stained clothes of her tasks, but in a simple, the professional crispness was gone, replaced by a genuine, undisguised warmth. "Eleonora would be so proud of you, Ms. Miller," he said quietly. "I know I am." The meeting took place that afternoon. William Van Doren lived in a cold, modern mansion that seemed designed to hold the ocean at bay rather than embrace it. He was a frail, angry old man, swimming in a suit that was too big for him, his eyes small and suspicious. He had expected a fight, a negotiation, a threat. Imagine meeting William Van Doren and the prospect of joining the foundation. William Van Doren lived in a cold, modern mansion that seemed designed to hold the ocean at bay rather than embrace it. He was a frail, angry old man, swimming in a suit that was too big for him, his eyes small and suspicious. He had expected a fight, a negotiation, a threat. When Audrey sat opposite him in his sterile, white living room, she was not angry. She was not afraid. She was simply calm. "I am Audrey Miller," she began, "Eleonora's daughter." "I know who you are," he snapped. "You've stolen my inheritance." "Your sister didn't leave me an inheritance, Mr. Van Doren," Audrey said, her voice gentle. "She left me a story and a choice. I wanted to tell you that I have decided to use her fortune to create a foundation for young artists in her name." The professional crispness was gone, replaced by a genuine, undisguised warmth. "Eleonora would be so proud of you, Ms. Miller." "I know I am." William stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. This was not what he had prepared for. "And I wanted to thank you," Audrey continued. "Thank me?" he scoffed. "For what?" "For making my mother who she was. Your cruelty, your choices, they turned her into a great artist. They filled her with a love so powerful that it lasted for 62 years of silence. It's a love that has now made me who I am. You tried to erase me, but instead, you made her immortal. And you gave me a purpose. So, thank you." She stood up. The old man was silent, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. He looked small, defeated, not by a legal battle, but by a grace he could not comprehend. The cycle of bitterness was broken. Audrey walked out of the cold, white house and into the brilliant Maine sunshine. She was no longer Audrey Miller, the invisible cashier. She was Audrey Van Doren Miller, the daughter of the artist and the fisherman, the custodian of a legacy. "Thank you." She stood up in his sterile, white living room. She was not angry. She was not afraid. Not by a legal battle, but by a grace he could not comprehend. The cycle of bitterness was broken. Audrey walked out of the cold, white house and into the brilliant Maying sunshine. She was no longer Audrey Miller, the invisible cashier. She was Audrey Van Doren Miller. She had arrived in Maine to claim a fortune, convinced she would have to pay a price. And she had. The price was her old life. The price was her loneliness. The price was the hollow space in her heart. In exchange, she had been given something far greater than money. She had been given a mother. She had been given a past. And she had been given a future she could build herself. She was home. She was home. A home. She was home. She was home. She was home. She had arrived in Maine to claim a fortune, convinced she would have to pay a price. And she had. The price was her old life. The price was her loneliness. The price was the hollow space in her heart. In exchange, she had been given something far greater than money. She had been given a mother. She had been given a past. And she had been given a future. She was home. In the old man with